Hey, it's Jazz from the Book Design Collective and Fleck Creative Studio, and today I'm going to walk you through how I modify my book cover mockups to resize them to various book trim sizes. So usually when you find a mockup that you love, it's not likely that it comes in different sizes, especially not different sizes that all have the same style to them. And even if they do, it probably doesn't come in a wide enough range for all the types of books that you design. So here I have one that I bought from Creative Market that I personally love. I use it on my website. It's anytime I feature a book mockup, this is the one that I have. And I bought it off of Creative Market. That's one of my favorite places to find mockups. There's a huge style range. You can get ones with shadows on top, kind of in situation, in various settings. For me, I just wanted something simple that just showcased the cover itself, and I wanted a bit of a shadow so it appears like it's standing up, but you could have a book shot overhead, and the list goes on for variations. One thing to note is that for the mockup that I bought, the background and the shadow are attached. So if you want to be able to make transparent PNGs with the shadow itself coming with the file, you wouldn't be able to do that on this particular mockup, because if I go over to my background and I toggle it off, you can see that I lose the background. I could still make a transparent PNG with just the cover itself, but I would lose the shadow. So if that's important to you, make sure that your mockup that you're buying has the shadow on its separate layer from the background. So to start off creating a book mockup in a different size, I like to kind of throw in the cover size that I'm going to be dealing with, which for me is a 6x8. You could of course just make a rectangle that is the exact size that you want at a 6x8, but since I have all my covers handy, I just like to drag it over to the very top layer, and then I kind of resize it to be the same height. You could go for the same width or height, you can choose either, but for me the same height is the easier one to start with. So that kind of gives us the same overall size of the cover that we're looking to adjust to. And then I lower the opacity so I can see what I'm doing here on that cover file. So what I'm then going to do is select everything in the mockup, and usually when you buy a Photoshop mockup, there's all sorts of layers that have all the effects that kind of make it feel like a real book. So the only thing that I'm not going to select is a little line that I added myself on top of the mockup that kind of increases the depth of the hinge fold that's on the front cover, and I just don't want that to get warped. So, but underneath that, I'm going to select every lighting adjustment, shadow, all sorts of effects that are in there, including the background, because again, like I mentioned, the background's attached to the shadow. So if I didn't select the background, it would not move with the cover size. So I've got everything selected, and then I'm going to transform it, but instead of holding down Shift to have it scale correctly, I actually do want it to be warped to be wider than it originally was. So I'm just going to pull out my mock-up and then drag it over and get it as close as possible to the size of the cover that I dropped in on the top layer. So that looks pretty good to me. So I'm going to hit enter and kind of toggle off there. So now you can see that I've got this kind of wider book size. Now this would be the 6x8 aspect ratio. And like I mentioned, I have this extra kind of fold line that I added in. So I would just move that back in place to the hinge area. So now what we have to do is go over to the art layer. And in all of these Photoshop mockups, you usually have some kind of layer that the creator of the mockup has specified, like place art here, your design goes here, that kind of thing. Mine says double click to edit, so I'll double click that file. And so here you can see is where you'll be placing your cover in the PSB file for it to pop over to your mockup. So I'm just going to delete out this text that I added, and I will drop in my cover file. Usually mockups are quite high resolution and they have large file sizes, so even though my cover drops in smaller, I can scale it up no problem and it won't have any kind of resolution issues. So as you can see, if I don't stretch it or anything, I have a little bit of a shorter cover to the PSB file, and that's because, again, it was more of a 6x9 aspect ratio and this cover is a 6x8. So if I hit save on this file and then go over to my mockup file, you can see that it's keeping anything around the cover that came over from the PSB, but you can also see that the cover got a bit smushed. So if we are to go back to this PSB file and just simply drag up the cover and drag it down to fit in. So it looks stretched over here, but because we've already stretched out the mock-up on the mock-up file, the PSD, when we save it and go back, now we have the correct aspect ratio. And since I do like to drop in the cover size that I'm changing to on that top layer, I can toggle it on and off just to make sure it is looking like the type hasn't been stretched in any strange way. So that's one way to do the mock-up. This would be ready to go. Another thing that you might want to keep in mind based on your mock-up is that if I kind of scale my top layer back to 100%, I can see that the color's a little bit off. So I personally add some adjustment layers to my Photoshop mockup files just so I can get it as close as possible. Because what happens with some of the effects that are really great and what make mockups so realistic, such as the textures and the highlights and the shadows, they unfortunately can also kind of change the color values of your cover. So then I like to add various adjustment layers as needed. And some covers look okay color-wise and some are more off than others, so I kind of go on an as-needs basis. But the way that I would do that is I would just make sure that I have the book selected, and then I would go to any adjustment layer and add what I need, such as brightness, hue, saturation, all of that. So I already have these here, and it looks like to me the cover is just a little bit darker and a little bit perhaps more blue. So I would go ahead and make those adjustments just so that I can match that final cover there. So this would be one way to do it as mentioned, and this would be done. What I would do before moving on is save this as a 6x8 mock-up, because right now it's a 6x9 file, and I want to make sure that I always have the 6x8 on hand so that I don't have to go through this process every single time I want a mock-up of a 6x8 cover. And just in case you want another way to do this, a very similar method but slightly different, if I go back and undo what we just did, would be to actually trim down on this, just so if it bothers you that you're looking at more of a stretched version of your cover, we can actually go ahead and crop this PSB file so that it is the exact size. Or not, size is not the exact term here because we're more talking about ratios. And then I'll save that file, and if I go back you can see that it's off, but if we go to the layer where the art place your art layer exists and transform that, then I can stretch that up to match the correct size. And because as you saw it looked a little bit squat, now it actually is the correct aspect ratio when it's pulled up. And again, because I have this cover on the top layer, I can just check to make sure nothing's looking off. My mock-up, it does have a bit of a lean and angle to it, so there will be a bit of kind of stretching and warping to the text, but it's very, very subtle. But this is a good check to make sure that you haven't done anything funky with stretching the letter forms too tall or too wide. This will make sure that you haven't messed up the mock-up in some way. So it's a good check to have. But there you have it. That's a way to change the size of your book mock-ups. You can do any size that you need. The easiest way to make sure you have the right size is just to drop in that final cover file size. Or again, you can just make a box, say you're doing 5.5 by 8.5, make a box that size, scale it to the right height of the mock-up itself, and then you can follow the same process to create as many as you need for your purposes. But I hope that was helpful, and if you have any questions, let me know in the comments. Thanks.